The fluorescent lights of Hartley and Associates flickered twice before settling into their usual hum, a sound Daniel Hartley had grown so accustomed to over the past 7 years that he only noticed it when something went wrong. Tonight, Christmas Eve, the office sat empty except for him, the desks cleared of coffee cups and design sketches, the drafting tables covered with protective sheets that made them look like sleeping ghosts. He stood at the window of his corner office watching Richmond's downtown prepare for celebration, the streets below dotted with last-minute shoppers carrying bags that bulge with wrapped promises, their breath forming small clouds in the December air. The email had arrived at 6:47 that morning while he was helping Lily brush the tangles out of her wild blonde curls, a task that required more patience than any architectural project he had ever undertaken. His phone had buzzed against the bathroom counter, and he had glanced at it out of habit, expecting perhaps a holiday greeting from a client or a reminder about the restaurant reservation he had made for dinner. Instead, the subject line had punched him in the chest with the force of a physical blow. Final offer, Morrison Development Corporation. Response required by January 2nd, $4.2 million. The number had burned itself into his consciousness, appearing unbidden throughout the day, like a persistent afterimage from staring too long at the sun. $4.2 million for Hartley and Associates, for the company he and Sarah had built from nothing but dreams, and a second mortgage on their first apartment for the legacy she had poured her heart into during those precious years, before the diagnosis, before the treatments, before the slow and terrible goodbye that had stretched across 18 months of hope and despair. Daniel pressed his palm against the cold glass of the window, feeling the December chill seep into his skin. Somewhere out there in the warm glow of decorated homes and cheerful gatherings, families were coming together to celebrate. His mother would be at his house by now, probably reorganizing his kitchen cabinets while pretending she was just looking for the good china, probably sneaking Lily an extra cookie despite his instructions about sugar before dinner. His daughter would be wearing the red velvet dress she had insisted upon, the one Sarah had bought during those final weeks of hope, when she still believed she might see another Christmas. The dress had hung in Lily's closet for 3 years unworn, because Daniel could not bear to see it without remembering the afternoon Sarah had brought it home. She had been so weak by then, needing to rest after the short walk from the car to the house, but her eyes had sparkled with that fierce determination that had defined her entire life. "She'll look like a little Christmas angel," Sarah had said, holding up the dress against the fading light from the window. "Promise me she'll wear it, Daniel. Promise me she'll have magical Christmases even when I'm not here to see them." He had promised. He had promised so many things during those final months, standing beside her hospital bed holding her hand as machines beeped their steady rhythm of borrowed time. He had promised to keep the company going, to finish the projects she had started to raise their daughter with stories of who her mother had been. He had promised to live, not just survive, though. On most days he was not certain he understood the difference anymore. The phone in his pocket buzzed again, and Daniel did not need to look at it to know it was another message from James Morrison, the CEO of Morrison Development, a man who had built his empire on the simple principle that everything and everyone had a price. Morrison had been circling Hartley and Associates for nearly 2 years now, his offers growing larger, with each rejection, his patience apparently inexhaustible. The first offer had been $2 million, which Daniel had declined without serious consideration. The second had been $3.5 million, accompanied by a personal dinner invitation that Daniel had also declined. Now this $4.2 million, with a deadline that fell 2 days after the new year, as if Morrison wanted Daniel to spend the holidays contemplating the weight of the decision. The cruelest part was that Morrison was not wrong about the company's vulnerability. Hartley and Associates had struggled since Sarah's death, not because the work was inferior, but because Daniel had lost something essential in the grief, some spark of creative passion that clients could sense even when they could not name it. They had lost 3 major contracts in the past year, and 2 of his best architects had left for positions with larger firms that could offer stability and better benefits. The office that had once buzzed with collaborative energy now felt like a mausoleum staffed by loyal employees who stayed out of respect for Sarah's memory, but who deserved better than a leader whose heart was only half present. Daniel turned away from the window and walked to his desk, where a framed photograph of Sarah sat beside his computer monitor. She had been 28 in the picture, her auburn hair catching the sunlight on the day they had signed the lease for their first office space, a cramped 2-room suite above a dry cleaner's shop that had smelled perpetually of chemical solvents. Her smile in the photograph was incandescent, full of the boundless optimism that had attracted him from the first moment they met at a crowded college party where she had accidentally spilled an entire cup of fruit punch down the front of his only good shirt. "I don't know what to do," he said to the photograph, his voice barely above a whisper in the empty office. "I know what you would want, but I don't know if I can do it anymore. I don't know if I have anything left." The photograph offered no response. Sarah's smile remained frozen in that moment of pure joy, oblivious to the cancer cells that were already dividing silently within her body, unaware that in 7 years she would be gone, and her husband would be standing alone in the office she had loved, contemplating whether to sell everything they had built together to a man who would tear it all down. Daniel checked his watch and realized with a start that he was running late. The reservation at Rosario's was for 7:30, and his mother would be waiting with Lily, probably already worried, probably already composing the lecture she would deliver about his inability to separate work from family time. He grabbed his coat from the hook behind the door and took one last look around the office at the awards lining the walls, at the architectural renderings of projects completed and projects abandoned, at the chair where Sarah used to sit during late nights when they were both too energized by a new design to go home. The drive to Rosario's took longer than usual, the streets clogged with holiday traffic, every parking lot overflowing with cars belonging to people who had remembered to buy gifts before Christmas Eve. Daniel drummed his fingers against the steering wheel and watched a family cross the street in front of him, the father carrying a small boy on his shoulders, while the mother held the hand of an older girl who skipped beside her with the careless joy that only children possess. The sight stirred something painful in his chest, a longing for the family dinners that would never happen, for the second child Sarah had wanted to try for before the diagnosis made such dreams impossible. His phone rang through the car's speakers, and he saw his mother's name flash across the dashboard display. He pressed the button to accept the call, bracing himself for the inevitable commentary on his tardiness. Margaret Hartley's voice filled the car, carrying that particular combination of concern and criticism that she had perfected over 63 years of life, the last 3 of which had been devoted almost entirely to supporting her son and granddaughter through the wreckage of loss. "Daniel, where are you? Lily is starting to get restless, and you know how she gets when she's hungry." "I'm about 10 minutes away, Mom. Traffic is terrible." "You were at the office, weren't you, on Christmas Eve, Daniel?" "I don't understand why you insist on torturing yourself in that empty building when you have a daughter who needs you here." Daniel swallowed the sharp response that rose automatically to his lips. His mother meant well, he knew, even when her concern manifested as judgment. She had uprooted her entire life in North Carolina to move to Richmond after Sarah's death, leaving behind her garden club and her church friends and her weekly bridge games because she could not bear the thought of her son and granddaughter struggling alone. Her presence had been a lifeline during those terrible first months, when Daniel could barely function enough to feed himself, let alone care for a 2-year-old who did not understand why Mommy was never coming home. "I had some things to finish up," he said, which was not entirely a lie. "But I'm on my way now. Order me whatever's good, and I'll be there before the breadsticks arrive." "The breadsticks have already arrived, Daniel. Lily has eaten 4 of them." A pause, and then his mother's voice softened, losing some of its edge. "She's wearing the dress, the red one. She insisted." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "I know, she told me this morning. She said she wants her mommy to see her from heaven. She said Sarah will be happy if she looks pretty tonight." The traffic light ahead turned green, but Daniel did not immediately register. It lost in the image of his daughter choosing to wear her mother's final gift, wanting to look beautiful for a woman who existed now only in photographs and memories. The car behind him honked impatiently, and he forced himself to focus, to press the accelerator, to navigate the remaining blocks to the restaurant without falling apart. "I'll be there soon, Mom. Tell Lily I love her. Tell her yourself when you get here. And Daniel, whatever it is that's bothering you, whatever you're carrying around that's keeping you at that office on Christmas Eve, remember that you're not alone. You don't have to carry it by yourself." The call ended before he could respond, which was probably for the best because he did not know what he would have said. His mother had always possessed an uncanny ability to see through his attempts at stoicism, to recognize the grief he tried to hide beneath a veneer of functionality. She had lost her own husband, Daniel's father, to a heart attack 15 years ago, and she understood the particular weight of moving through the world with a permanent absence at your side. Rosario's Italian restaurant occupied a corner building in Richmond's historic downtown district, its red brick facade strung with white Christmas lights that cast a warm glow across the sidewalk. Daniel found a parking spot 2 blocks away and walked quickly through the cold, his breath forming clouds that dissipated into the night air. Through the restaurant's large front windows, he could see tables filled with families and couples, the soft candlelight giving everyone's faces a golden glow that made them look like figures in a Renaissance painting. He spotted his table immediately upon entering table 7, near the window where his mother sat with her back to the door and Lily faced the entrance with an expression of such concentrated anticipation that Daniel felt his heart crack open a little further. His daughter was indeed wearing the red velvet dress, her blonde curls somewhat tamed by what had clearly been Margaret's patient efforts, though several rebellious strands had already escaped to frame her face in their usual wild halo. A small bow clung precariously to the side of her head, fighting a losing battle against the fundamental chaos of Lily's hair. When she saw him, Lily's face transformed with a joy so pure and uncomplicated that Daniel understood not for the first time why he continued to get out of bed each morning. She slid off her chair and ran toward him, weaving between tables with the confidence of a child who assumed the world would simply arrange itself around her movements, and launched herself at his legs with enough force to make him stagger. "Daddy, Daddy, you're here. Grandma said you were stuck at work, but I knew you would come because you promised and you always keep your promises." Daniel lifted his daughter into his arms, feeling the familiar weight of her small body against his chest, inhaling the scent of her shampoo mixed with the garlic bread she had clearly been consuming in his absence. "Of course I came, Princess. I would never miss dinner with my 2 favorite girls. Grandma ordered spaghetti for me with meatballs, and she said I could have dessert if I'm good. And look, Daddy, look at my dress. Isn't it pretty? I wanted to wear it so Mommy could see me from heaven. Do you think she can see me?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating, asked with the innocent expectation of a child who still believed her father had answers to questions that the wisest philosophers had pondered for millennia. Daniel held his daughter tighter and carried her back to the table, settling her into the chair beside his, before taking his own seat across from his mother. "I think Mommy can definitely see you," he said, his voice steady despite the effort it required. "And I think she's very proud of how beautiful you look." Lily beamed and straightened in her chair, smoothing the velvet of her dress with small hands that still bore traces of the breadstick crumbs she had been consuming. Margaret caught Daniel's eye across the table and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, recognizing the difficulty of the moment, appreciating his handling of it. The restaurant buzzed with the ambient noise of celebration, laughter, and conversation blending with the soft Italian music playing through speakers hidden somewhere in the ceiling. Daniel watched the other tables as a waiter brought water and menus, noting the families gathered around festive centerpieces, the couples holding hands across white tablecloths, the elderly pair in the corner, who ate in comfortable silence, their companionship so deep it no longer required words. Lily demanded his attention with a detailed account of her day delivered at a pace and volume that made several nearby diners smile. She had helped Grandma make cookies, though Grandma had not let her use the sharp cookie cutters, only the round ones, which was completely unfair because she was practically 6 years old and therefore old enough for sharp things. She had wrapped presents using an entire roll of tape and approximately half a roll of wrapping paper per gift, and she had written a letter to Santa explaining that what she really wanted for Christmas was a puppy, not because she didn't like the other things on her list, but because a puppy would be someone to play with when Daddy was at work and Grandma was busy. The mention of her letter to Santa sent a spike of guilt through Daniel's chest. He had bought her a purple bicycle, the one she had pointed out during a trip to the store in October, along with an impressive collection of art supplies and books and a stuffed elephant that was nearly as large as she was. But there was no puppy waiting under the tree because puppies required time and attention and energy that Daniel was not certain he could spare, because he was barely managing to keep himself and his daughter fed and clothed and present. Margaret seemed to sense his discomfort and smoothly redirected the conversation toward the menu, engaging Lily in a spirited debate about whether chocolate cake or tiramisu was the superior dessert option. Daniel let their voices wash over him, grateful for the moment of respite, and allowed his gaze to wander around the restaurant. That was when he noticed the woman at the table diagonal from theirs, table 8, according to the small brass numbers affixed to each surface. She sat alone in a chair that faced the door, a glass of water untouched before her hands folded in her lap with a stillness that spoke of conscious effort. She wore a green dress the color of emeralds in sunlight, and small pearl earrings caught the candlelight when she turned her head. Her dark hair fell in careful waves around her face, and even from across the room, Daniel could see that she was beautiful in that particular way that had nothing to do with symmetry or fashion, and everything to do with the quality of attention in her expression. She was watching the door with the focused intensity of someone waiting for someone important, and Daniel felt an inexplicable urge to look away, as if he were intruding on a private moment. But something about the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself so carefully, reminded him of the posture he had seen in his own reflection during the months after Sarah's diagnosis, when he had tried so hard to appear normal, while the world crumbled silently around him. "Daddy, are you listening?" Lily's voice cut through his distraction. "I asked you what you want to eat and you're not even paying attention." Daniel turned back to his daughter, forcing a smile. "Sorry, princess." "What did you say?" "I said Grandma is getting the chicken parmesan and I'm getting spaghetti with extra meatballs, which means you have to get something different so we can share. That's the rule. We always share. Mommy said sharing makes everything taste better." The casual invocation of Sarah's wisdom, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of a child who did not fully understand that her mother was gone, landed like a punch to Daniel's solar plexus. He nodded and picked up his menu, though the words blurred before his eyes. "I'll get the lasagna," he said. "Your mommy always said Rosario's had the best lasagna in Richmond." "Because it does," Lily confirmed with complete authority. "Grandma tell Daddy about the time Mommy ate 3 pieces of lasagna and then said she couldn't move, and Daddy had to carry her to the car." Margaret smiled, though Daniel could see the brightness of unshed tears in her eyes. "That was the night you were conceived, actually. We came here to celebrate after Sarah got the news that she was pregnant. She was so happy she couldn't stop eating." The memories surfaced, unbidden, vivid, and painful and precious all at once. Sarah at this very restaurant, her face glowing with excitement, as she told him about the positive pregnancy test she had taken that morning, her appetite seemingly bottomless as she consumed plate after plate while making plans for a nursery they had not yet built. They had been so young then, so certain that life would unfold according to their careful designs. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but his attention was caught by movement at the door. A man had entered the restaurant, tall and dark-haired, and wearing an expensive coat that probably cost more than Daniel's entire wardrobe. He walked with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room, his eyes scanning the tables until they landed on the woman in the green dress. Something about the way the woman straightened in her chair, the way her hands tightened in her lap, sent a signal of warning through Daniel's consciousness. He watched as the man approached her table, but did not sit, as he stood over her with his hands in his pockets and his expression blank in a way that seemed deliberately so. Their conversation was too quiet for Daniel to hear over the ambient noise of the restaurant, but he could read the body language clearly enough. The man was speaking, his mouth moving in short bursts that suggested statements rather than dialogue. The woman was listening, her face pale in the candlelight, her shoulders drawing inward as if trying to make herself smaller. And then, in a movement so casual it was almost obscene, the man checked his watch, said something brief and final, and turned to walk away. The woman did not cry out or chase after him. She did not cause a scene or demand explanation. She simply sat there as he left, her hands still folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the empty chair across from her, as if she could not quite process what had just happened. And then, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, her shoulders began to shake. Daniel felt his mother's hand on his arm. "Daniel, what are you looking at?" He did not answer immediately, his attention still fixed on the woman at table 8. She had lowered her head now, and he could see her pressing a napkin to her eyes, her movements quick and furtive, as if she was desperate to prevent anyone from witnessing her distress. "Nothing," he said, turning back to his family. "Just thinking." But Lily had followed his gaze, her child's curiosity naturally drawn to anything that captured adult attention, and her expression shifted into something that Daniel recognized with a combination of pride and concern. It was her problem-solving face, the look she got when she encountered a situation she felt compelled to address. "Daddy, why is that lady crying?" Margaret turned to look now, too, and Daniel could see his mother's expression soften with the understanding as she took in the scene at table 8. Some people have a hard time at the holidays, sweetheart. It's not always a happy season for everyone. But it's Christmas Eve, Lily said, her voice carrying the certainty of a child who had not yet learned that holidays could be the loneliest times of all. Everyone should be happy on Christmas Eve. Daniel thought about explaining about finding age-appropriate words for the complex truth that happiness was not guaranteed by calendar dates. But before he could formulate a response, Lily had slid off her chair and was weaving between tables with the fearless determination that characterized her approach to the world. Lily, Daniel stood quickly, nearly knocking over his water glass. Lily, wait. But his daughter was already at the woman's table, her small figure standing beside the woman's chair, with the confident posture of someone who had never been taught to fear strangers, only to treat them as friends she had not yet made. Daniel moved to retrieve her, apologizing under his breath to the diners he passed. He reached the table just as Lily was saying in her clear, high voice that carried much further than he would have liked. "Excuse me, are you okay? My daddy says it's okay to be sad sometimes, but you shouldn't be sad all by yourself because that makes it worse." The woman looked up, and Daniel saw her face clearly for the first time. She was perhaps 30 or 31, with brown eyes that were red-rimmed from crying, and high cheekbones that seemed designed to catch the light. Her mascara had smudged slightly beneath her eyes, and her carefully applied lipstick had faded at the edges, where she had been pressing the napkin to her mouth. She looked devastated and beautiful, and completely taken aback by the small blonde child who had appeared at her table. Daniel reached for Lily's hand, his face burning with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. Lily, sweetheart, we can't just walk up to people we don't know." "But she's sad, Daddy." Lily's voice held a note of reproach, as if Daniel had somehow failed to understand the obvious moral imperative of the situation. "She's all alone on Christmas Eve, and she's crying. We can't just not do anything." The woman wiped her eyes with the napkin, attempting a smile that did not quite reach completion. "It's all right, really. She's very sweet." "I'm not sweet, I'm Lily," his daughter corrected with her typical disdain for inaccurate descriptions. "And you have a really nice dress. Green is my second favorite color after purple. My mommy's favorite color was green too, but she's in heaven now, so she can't wear dresses anymore." Daniel felt a familiar stab of grief at Lily's casual mention of Sarah, at the way she had integrated her mother's death into her understanding of the world with a matter-of-factness that both comforted and shattered him. "Lily, I'm sure this lady would like to be alone." "Actually," the woman said, her voice slightly unsteady, but her gaze meeting Daniel's with something that might have been gratitude. "I really wouldn't. I've been alone quite enough for one evening." A beat of silence passed between them, during which Daniel became acutely aware of several things simultaneously: the warmth of the restaurant, the smell of garlic bread and wood smoke, the weight of his daughter's hand in his, and the particular quality of the woman's attention as she looked at him. She was studying his face with intensity, as if she was trying to read something in his expression that went beyond the surface level of social interaction. "Daddy," Lily tugged at his hand, her voice dropping to what she probably believed was a whisper, but what was actually a stage-worthy declaration. "Can we eat dinner with her, please? She shouldn't be all alone. You always say that being alone when you're sad makes everything harder." Daniel looked at the woman, expecting to see reluctance or polite refusal, but instead he saw something that looked almost like hope. "I'm Daniel," he heard himself saying, "Daniel Hartley, and this is my daughter Lily, who is apparently the welcoming committee this evening." "Grace," the woman replied, "Grace Sullivan, and your daughter is actually the nicest thing that's happened to me all day." "Daddy, does that mean we can sit with her, please, pretty please, with sprinkles and whipped cream and a cherry on top?" Daniel glanced back at his mother, who had turned in her chair to observe the proceedings, with an expression that combined curiosity and something that looked suspiciously like approval. She gave him a small nod, the kind of communication they had developed over years of silent understanding, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest. The rational part of his brain pointed out that this was absurd. They did not know this woman. They were in the middle of their own family dinner. He should politely decline, return to his table, and let this stranger process whatever disappointment had brought her to tears. But another part of him, a part that had been dormant so long, he had almost forgotten it existed, and recognized something in Grace Sullivan's eyes. A woundedness that mirrored his own, a loneliness that went deeper than a single evening's disappointment. A person who needed in this moment exactly what Lily was offering, the simple gift of company. Would you like to join us? The words came out before he could second-guess them. We have an extra chair at our table, and I'm told the breadsticks here are exceptional. The best in the whole universe, Lily corrected solemnly. I don't say things that aren't true. Grace looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel could see the war playing out behind her eyes, the desire to accept battling against pride or embarrassment or simple disbelief that strangers would offer such kindness. Then something in her expression resolved, and she nodded slowly. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much. Lily practically vibrated with excitement as they made their way back to table 7, leading Grace by the hand, as if she had known her for years rather than minutes. Margaret stood as they approached, extending her hand with the gracious formality that was as much a part of her as her sharp observations and overprotective concern. I'm Margaret Hartley, Daniel's mother. Please join us. It seems my granddaughter has already adopted you. Grace Sullivan, thank you for having me. I promise I'm not usually the crying woman that strangers rescue at restaurants. We all have those days, Margaret said, and something in her tone suggested she was speaking from personal experience. The important thing is having someone to share them with. They rearranged themselves around table 7, with Lily insisting on sitting between Daniel and Grace, her small body a bridge between the two adults. The waiter appeared looking slightly confused by the addition to their party, and Daniel ordered another place setting along with the lasagna he had promised to get. For a few minutes, the conversation was awkward, filled with the kind of surface-level pleasantries that strangers exchange when thrown together by circumstance. Grace asked about the restaurant, and Margaret explained that it had been a family favorite for years, that Sarah had discovered it during their first visit to Richmond and had insisted on celebrating every important occasion there. Sarah was my daughter-in-law, Margaret added, and Daniel heard the careful deliberation in her voice, the decision to address the obvious question before it could become uncomfortable. She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. Grace's expression shifted, her eyes moving from Margaret to Daniel to Lily with a new understanding. I'm so sorry, that must have been incredibly difficult. It was, Daniel said simply, because there were no words adequate to describe the experience of watching the person you loved most in the world wither and fade, of holding your 2-year-old daughter at the funeral and trying to explain why mommy was sleeping in the pretty box and would not wake up. But we're managing. Lily keeps us going. Daddy says I'm his reason to get up in the morning, Lily announced, completely devoid of modesty. And Grandma says I'm a handful, but I think a handful is good because it means there's a lot of me. Grace laughed, and the sound transformed her face, erasing some of the tension that had been etched around her mouth and eyes. I think you might be right about that. The food began to arrive, plates of steaming pasta and fragrant chicken parmesan, and the lasagna that had once been Sarah's favorite. Lily immediately launched into a detailed explanation of the proper way to eat spaghetti, which apparently involved twirling it around your fork exactly 7 times, no more and no less, because that was how her mommy had taught her. And her mommy was always right about everything. Daniel watched Grace's face as Lily talked, noting the way she listened with genuine interest, the way she asked follow-up questions that encouraged his daughter's elaborate explanations, the way she seemed to genuinely enjoy the chaos of a 6-year-old's dinner conversation. Most adults grew tired of Lily's intensity, within minutes their patience wearing thin beneath the onslaught of questions and opinions and tangential stories. But Grace leaned into it, matching Lily's energy with her own engagement. Between bites of lasagna and the occasional sip of the wine Margaret had insisted on ordering, Daniel learned pieces of Grace's story. She was a kindergarten teacher at Riverside Elementary, which explained her ease with Lily's conversational style. She had grown up in a small town in Virginia, had moved to Richmond after college to escape a relationship that was going nowhere, had built a life for herself that was full and meaningful, even if it was not the life she had imagined when she was young. I was supposed to have a date tonight, Grace said at some point, her voice carefully neutral. A blind date set up by my sister. He showed up, told me he was only here because his mother had pressured him into it, and left. I've been sitting here trying to figure out how to drive home without crying. The casual cruelty of the story made Daniel's jaw tighten. He thought of the man in the expensive coat, the way he had stood over Grace's table with his hands in his pockets, the way he had checked his watch as if her feelings were an inconvenience to his schedule. He's a jerk face, Lily declared with conviction. That's what people are when they make other people sad. Lily, Margaret warned, though her tone lacked any real reproach. It's true, Grandma. You said the same word when Mrs. Patterson from church said mean things about Daddy's casserole at the potluck. Daniel hid his smile behind his napkin. He remembered that incident and well his mother's outrage at the suggestion that the store-bought casserole Daniel had brought to the Christmas potluck reflected poorly on his character. She's not wrong, Grace said, and her smile was wider now, more genuine. About either thing, probably. He was definitely a jerk face. And I'm sure your casserole was fine, Daniel. It was actually terrible, Daniel admitted. I left it in the oven too long, and the cheese turned into something resembling volcanic rock. But I appreciate the defense. The conversation flowed more easily after that, moving from topic to topic with the natural rhythm of people who were discovering unexpected common ground. Grace asked about his work, and Daniel found himself talking about architecture in a way he had not done in months, explaining the philosophy behind his designs, the way he believed buildings should serve the people who use them, rather than simply impressing viewers with their aesthetic ambition. My wife and I started the company together, he said, and the words came more easily than he had expected, as if Grace's presence had somehow unlocked something that had been closed tight for years. Sarah handled the business side while I focused on design. She was the one who convinced me we could make it work, that we didn't need to spend our lives working for someone else's vision. She sounds amazing. She was. Daniel looked at Lily, who was busy constructing a tower out of sugar packets. She still is, in a way. Every decision I make, I ask myself what Sarah would think, whether she would approve, whether I'm living up to what we built together. Grace was quiet for a moment, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him feel both seen and slightly exposed. That sounds like a heavy burden to carry. It is, but it's also the only way I know how to keep her alive. Through the work, through Lily, through trying to be the person she believed I could be. Margaret cleared her throat gently. Daniel, I think someone is falling asleep in her spaghetti. They both turned to look at Lily, who had abandoned her sugar packet tower and was listing sideways in her chair, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Her cheek was dangerously close to her plate, and a strand of spaghetti sauce had somehow gotten into her hair. Someone needs to get home to bed, Daniel said, reaching over to steady his daughter. What do you think, Princess, ready to go see if Santa found our house? Lily's eyes snapped open with the instant alertness of a child who had heard the magic word. Santa Daddy, we have to go. We have to put out cookies and milk and also carrots for the reindeer because Rudolph probably gets really tired from flying all night. The bill was paid, Daniel insisting despite Grace's protests, and they made their way toward the exit. The restaurant had emptied somewhat during their dinner, families departing for home and holiday preparations, and the walk to the door felt strangely intimate, as if they were the last people left in a world that had quietly transformed around them. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, carrying the faint scent of snow that had not yet begun to fall. Christmas lights sparkled from every storefront, and somewhere in the distance, church bells were chiming the hour. Lily had found a second win and was running ahead, her red dress a bright spot of color against the gray sidewalk. Daniel turned to Grace, suddenly aware that this strange interlude was coming to an end. Thank you, he said, and the words felt inadequate for everything he meant them to express. For joining us, for being so good with Lily, for making tonight something other than what it could have been. Grace smiled, and in the glow of the Christmas lights, she looked like something out of a dream, beautiful and unexpected. I should be thanking you. I came here tonight expecting the worst Christmas Eve of my life, and instead I got this. Lily, Margaret's voice cut through the moment. Don't run so far ahead, you'll fall. The brief distraction gave Daniel a moment of uncharacteristic courage. Grace. He reached into his pocket, fingers finding the business cards he always carried but rarely distributed. I know this is probably strange, and you have absolutely no obligation to respond, but would it be okay if I had your number? Not in a weird way. I'd like to know you're okay. And maybe if you wanted, we could get coffee sometime. Grace took the card from his hand, her fingers briefly touching his in the transfer. I'd like that. I'd really like that. They exchanged numbers, typing digits into phones with fingers made clumsy by cold and nerves. And then Lily was running back toward them, demanding that her father hurry because the reindeer were going to be so hungry. Grace knelt down to Lily's level, her green dress pooling on the cold sidewalk. "Thank you for coming to talk to me tonight, Lily. That was very brave of you." "You're welcome. My daddy says good people shouldn't have to be sad alone, and I could tell you were a good people." Lily reached out and patted Grace's cheek with one small hand. "You have nice eyes. They're warm like hot chocolate on a cold day." "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my eyes," Grace said, and Daniel could see the brightness of emotion in her gaze. "Merry Christmas, Lily." "Merry Christmas, Miss Grace." Lily threw her arms around Grace's neck for a hug that nearly toppled them both. "I hope you get everything you want from Santa, but maybe not a puppy because Daddy says they're a lot of work and I don't have one yet, so you probably shouldn't either until I do first." They parted with waves and well wishes, Grace walking toward a gray sedan parked half a block away, Daniel herding his mother and daughter toward his own car. Lily chattered the entire way about everything and nothing, but Daniel heard only fragments of her monologue. His mind was still at table 7, still watching Grace's face transform from despair to something approaching hope. The drive home passed in a blur of Christmas lights and Lily's increasingly sleepy commentary. When they pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the Christmas lights strung along the roof and the glow of the tree visible through the front window. Getting Lily ready for bed took longer than usual, the excitement of Christmas Eve making her resist every step of the process. She insisted on arranging the cookies for Santa with geometric precision, on positioning the glass of milk at exactly the right angle, on writing a last-minute addendum to her letter, explaining that she had been very good all year, and also she had shared her dinner with a sad lady who needed friends, so that should count as extra points. Finally, after what felt like hours of negotiations, Lily was in bed, her blonde curls spread across the pillow like a golden halo. "Daddy." Her voice was small and sleepy, barely above a whisper. "Yes, Princess. Miss Grace was nice. I liked her." "I liked her too, sweetheart." "Do you think she'll be okay? She was really sad before we found her." Daniel smoothed the hair back from his daughter's forehead, marveling at the capacity for empathy in someone so young. "I think she'll be okay. Sometimes people just need to know that someone cares. You showed her that tonight. Because that's what we do when people are sad. We care about them." "That's right. That's exactly what we do." Lily's eyes were closing now. "Daddy, I think Mommy would have liked Miss Grace too. She listened when I talked, and she didn't make that face that grown-ups make when they think I talk too much." The observation landed somewhere deep in Daniel's chest. "I think you might be right about that, Princess. Now go to sleep. Santa can't come if you're awake." "Merry Christmas, Daddy. I love you." "I love you too, Lily, more than anything in the world." He sat beside her bed for a long time after she fell asleep, listening to the soft sounds of her breathing. The house was quiet around him, and in the silence, Daniel found himself replaying the evening in his mind. Grace Sullivan. The woman in the green dress with a laugh that had made him feel for the first time in years like something other than a man going through the motions of a life he no longer recognized. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out irrationally, hoping to see a message from Grace, despite the impossibility of such a thing, given that they had parted only an hour ago. But the message was not from Grace. It was from James Morrison. "Daniel, I hope you are having a wonderful Christmas Eve. Just wanted to remind you that the offer expires January 2nd, $4.2 million. Think about what that could mean for you and your daughter. No more late nights, no more stress. Freedom to be the father she deserves. Call me when you're ready to talk." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, his momentary lightness evaporating. The weight of the decision settled back onto his shoulders. He thought about the community center, the project that had been Sarah's final design before the diagnosis. The Sarah Hartley Community Center for Children with Disabilities, a building she had poured her heart into. Morrison had included it in the acquisition offer, claiming he would complete the project as part of his portfolio, but Daniel had done enough research to know what Morrison's completion would actually mean: a scaled-down version of Sarah's vision, stripped of the features that made it special. Or worse, demolished entirely to make room for the luxury condominiums that were Morrison's actual specialty. His phone buzzed again, and this time Daniel almost did not look. But when he glanced at the screen, the name that appeared made his breath catch. Grace Sullivan, I just wanted to say thank you again. Tonight could have been terrible, but instead it was kind of wonderful. Your daughter is extraordinary. And you seem like a genuinely good person, which is apparently rare enough to feel worth mentioning. Merry Christmas, Daniel. I'm glad I got lost in that restaurant. Daniel read the message 3 times, feeling something warm spread through his chest with each reading. He typed back a response. Merry Christmas, Grace. Lily insisted I tell you that she hopes you get everything you want from Santa, except a puppy because she's still working on that situation herself. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you got lost in that restaurant too. He sent the message and sat for a moment with the phone in his hand, aware that he was smiling. His phone buzzed one more time. Grace Sullivan, Lily's negotiating skills are impressive. Tell her I'll hold off on the puppy request until she's had a chance to make her case. And Daniel, sleep well. Tomorrow is a new day. A new day. The phrase settled into his consciousness, simple and profound. He had been living in the shadow of what he had lost each day, a repetition of the one before. But sitting here in the quiet of Christmas Eve, with an unexpected connection glowing on his phone screen, Daniel felt something he had almost forgotten was possible. Hope. He typed back, tomorrow is a new day. I'd almost forgotten what that feels like. Good night, Grace. And then for the first time in years, Daniel Hartley fell asleep on Christmas Eve with something other than grief as his final conscious thought. The weeks that followed moved with a rhythm Daniel had forgotten existed, a tempo that belonged to life rather than mere survival. January arrived with its gray skies and bitter winds, but inside the small world he was building with Grace and Lily, warmth accumulated like snowfall in reverse, each day adding another layer of connection to what had begun as a chance encounter on Christmas Eve. Their first coffee date happened on December 27th at Bean and Barley Cafe near the James River. Daniel arrived 15 minutes early and was surprised to find Grace already seated at a table near the window. She wore a gray sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She smiled when she saw him, and Daniel felt something unlock in his chest, some tightness he had grown so accustomed to that he had forgotten it was there. They talked for hours. Grace told him about her students, about the little boy in her class who had announced his plans to marry his pet hamster, and the girl who had decided to pursue a career as a professional dinosaur when she grew up. Daniel found himself sharing stories about Lily, about the challenges and unexpected joys of raising a child who saw the world in terms of problems to be solved. And somewhere in the middle of it all, they began telling each other the truth. Daniel told her about Sarah, not the sanitized version he offered to acquaintances, but the real story. How they had met at a party where she ruined his only good shirt. How she had convinced him to take a risk on starting their own company. How the diagnosis had come like a bomb dropped into the middle of their carefully constructed life. He told her about the 18 months of treatment, about the hope that flickered and flickered again, about the morning he had woken up to find Sarah watching him sleep, her eyes already beginning to look past him towards something he could not see. She made me promise to keep living. Daniel said, his voice rough with emotions he had held in check for so long. Not just surviving, but actually living. She was so worried I would shut down, that I would let grief become the only thing that defined me. Did you shut down? For a while, the first year was just existing, getting through each day, making sure Lily was fed and clothed and not completely traumatized by losing her mother at 2 years old. Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. My mom moved in to help, and without her, I don't know what would have happened, but I wasn't really present. I was a ghost in my own life. What changed? Lily. She kept pulling me back, asking me to read stories, to play at tea party, to watch cartoons. Eventually, I started to feel things again, started to remember what it was like to laugh. Grace was quiet for a moment. Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with that. It's strange, Daniel said. I don't usually talk about Sarah this way. With most people, I keep it surface level. But with you, I want to be honest. Grace looked down at her hands. I've had my share of disappointments. Men who said they wanted serious relationships but were actually just afraid of being alone. Men who made promises they never intended to keep, like the man on Christmas Eve. Marcus, his name is Marcus Webb, and yes, like him, he was the latest in a long line of people who saw me as a convenience rather than a person. They talked until the barista began giving them pointed looks about closing time, and then they talked some more in the parking lot. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I should go," Grace said finally. "I have lesson plans to review. My mom has Lily for another hour, but yes, I should go too." They stood beside their cars and Daniel felt the moment stretching between them. "Grace, I'm glad Lily walked up to your table on Christmas Eve. I'm glad you decided to join us for dinner. And I'm glad you texted me afterward." Grace smiled, and in the golden light of the sunset, she looked like something out of a painting. "I'm glad too, Daniel, for all of it." Grace came to dinner at Daniel's house on a Wednesday evening in mid-January, the first time she would spend extended hours with Lily was outside a restaurant or park. Daniel had cleaned the house with obsessive attention, and Lily had opinions about approximately 47 details that Daniel had not realized required consultation. When the doorbell rang at 6 o'clock, Lily sprinted to answer it. "Miss Grace, you came? I told Daddy you would come, but he was nervous and kept checking the clock, and Grandma said he was acting like a teenager, which I don't understand because teenagers are old, and Daddy is even older. But anyway, welcome to our house." The evening unfolded with chaotic warmth. Lily dominated the dinner conversation with a detailed presentation on why velociraptors were actually the most dangerous dinosaurs, complete with demonstrations using her fork and knife that left tomato sauce splattered across the tablecloth. Grace listened with genuine interest, asking questions that encouraged Lily's enthusiasm. After dinner, while Margaret handled the dishes, Grace and Daniel sat on the back porch with coffee while Lily ran circles around the backyard. "She's extraordinary," Grace said, her eyes following Lily's erratic path. "The way her mind works, the connections she makes, the absolute confidence she has in her own opinions." Sarah used to say that Lily came out of the womb with a fully formed personality and has just been refining it ever since. Daniel smiled at the memory, surprised to find that it brought warmth rather than only pain. "She was like that even as a baby. Other infants would cry for no apparent reason, but Lily always cried with purpose." "You talk about Sarah more easily now than you did a few weeks ago," Grace observed. "When we first met, you mentioned her in this careful way, like you were handling something fragile. It's different now." My grandfather said something that stuck with me, about carrying people's light forward instead of living in their shadow. I'm still figuring out what that means, but I think part of it is letting Sarah be a presence in my life instead of an absence. "That's beautiful, Daniel. It's work. Every day it's work, but it feels different than it used to." He reached over and took her hand. "You're part of that. Meeting you, having someone to talk to who chose to be in my life rather than being obligated to be there, it's changed something." Grace squeezed his hand. "I feel the same way. I've spent so many years waiting for someone to choose me. And then you appeared and your daughter walked up to my table like it was the most natural thing in the world, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore." Lily came sprinting toward them. "Daddy, Miss Grace, watch me do a cartwheel I've been practicing, and I can almost do it without falling." And they watched as Lily attempted the cartwheel, which ended in a controlled collapse onto the grass, followed by a declaration that she had meant to do that, and it was actually a new move called the Lily Special. The deadline for Morrison's offer loomed on the horizon. January 2nd had come and gone, with Daniel requesting an extension, and Morrison had grudgingly agreed to wait until the end of the month. Daniel spent hours poring over the acquisition documents, searching for language that might protect the community center. He consulted with lawyers and accountants and lay awake at night calculating possibilities until the numbers blurred into meaninglessness. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon when his secretary forwarded an email that Morrison had accidentally copied to the wrong address. It was an internal communication meant for Morrison's development team. Project 2847 Hartley Community Center represents suboptimal use of prime real estate. Recommend immediate termination upon acquisition completion. Site analysis indicates potential for 120-unit luxury residential development with projected ROI of 340% over 5 years. Existing foundation work may be salvageable for parking structure. Daniel read the email 3 times each reading, adding fuel to the fire building in his chest. Morrison had never intended to complete the community center. He called Grace that night needing to hear her voice. He was lying from the beginning. Every meeting, every promise about honoring Sarah's vision, it was all just manipulation. "What are you going to do?" Grace asked. I don't know. If I refuse to sell, I'm trapped with a company I can't run effectively. If I sell to Morrison, I'm handing Sarah's dream over to someone who's going to destroy it. Either way, I lose. Those aren't the only options. What do you mean? You're thinking like this is a binary choice. But what if there's a third way? What if you could sell the company but protect the community center somehow? Or find different buyers, or separate the project from the rest of the acquisition? Daniel was quiet for a moment. He had been so focused on the Morrison offer as a yes or no proposition that he had stopped looking for alternatives. You might be onto something. The community center isn't technically part of Hartley and Associates anymore. Sarah set it up as a separate nonprofit entity before she died. If I could find funding to finish the project independently, then you could sell the company without selling Sarah's legacy. Grace, you might have just saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. The visit to his grandfather came on a Saturday in late January. Daniel made the drive to Sunrise Memory Care with a complicated mixture of hope and dread. The facility was located in a quiet suburb of Richmond, a sprawling single-story building surrounded by carefully maintained gardens. He found Walter in the common room, seated near a window. His grandfather had aged dramatically in the past 3 years, his once robust frame shrunken and fragile. But when he looked up at Daniel's approach, his blue eyes held a clarity that had been absent during previous visits. Daniel. Walter's voice was thin but certain. I was hoping you would come. Hi, Grandpa. The nurses said you were having a good day. Good days, bad days. They all blur together in this place, but today I remember things. He gestured to the chair beside him. Sit. We need to talk about the company. I don't know what to do, Grandpa. Part of me thinks I should take Morrison's offer. The money would solve so many problems. And the other part remembers what Sarah said about the company, about it being our legacy. Walter was quiet for a long moment. Then, did I ever tell you about my friend Tommy Garrett from Vietnam? Daniel shook his head. Tommy was my best friend in country. We went through basic together. He had a girl back home, Jenny, and they were going to get married as soon as he finished his tour. Walter's hands trembled as he spoke. Tommy died 3 days before he was supposed to rotate home. Stepped on a mine during a routine patrol. I was 10 feet away when it happened. Grandpa, I'm so sorry. I spent years carrying that weight, the survivor's guilt, the wondering why it was him and not me. Walter turned to Daniel, his eyes bright with emotion. But here's what I learned. The best way to honor the people we've lost isn't to live in their shadow. It's to carry their light forward, not to preserve it in amber unchanged and unchanging, but to let it grow into something new. I don't understand what you're saying. I'm saying that Sarah's legacy isn't the company. It isn't the buildings or the contracts. Sarah's legacy is you. It's Lily. The company is just bricks and paper. It matters only insofar as it helps you become the person you're meant to be. Daniel felt tears burning in his eyes. But the community center, Sarah's final project. If I sell, Morrison will destroy it. Then don't let him. Walter's grip tightened. Sell the company if you need to, but protect what matters. Find another way to complete Sarah's vision. There's always another way, Daniel. They sat in silence for a long moment, grandfather and grandson. Then Walter asked, Your mother tells me you've been different lately, lighter. She thinks it has to do with someone named Grace. We met on Christmas Eve. She was at the restaurant where we were having dinner, and Lily walked up to her table because she could tell Grace was sad. You like this woman? I do, but it feels complicated. It's only been 3 years since Sarah. Is that too soon? Am I dishonoring her memory? Walter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. Sarah didn't die so you could spend the rest of your life alone. She died because sometimes terrible things happen to good people. The question isn't whether you're honoring her memory by moving on. The question is whether you're honoring your own life by choosing to live it fully. He leaned forward, fixing Daniel with a gaze that seemed to see straight through to his soul. I was in a nursing home in Charleston for 2 years after your grandmother passed. I nearly let myself fade away because I couldn't imagine a life without her. But then I realized something. Helen didn't fall in love with a man who would give up when things got hard. She fell in love with a fighter, a builder. Walter's voice strengthened with conviction. Sarah fell in love with the same kind of man. Don't let grief make you into someone she wouldn't recognize. Daniel hugged his grandfather with a desperation he had not felt since childhood. Thank you, Grandpa, for everything. And Daniel, the woman Grace, bring her to meet me sometime. I want to see the person who's bringing my grandson back to life. The confrontation with the past came unexpectedly in the fluorescent-lit aisles of a Target on a Saturday afternoon in early March. Grace was shopping for school supplies with Lily, who had insisted on coming along because she had very strong opinions about crayons. They were debating the merits of different dinosaur stickers when Grace looked up and saw him, Marcus Webb, standing in the household goods aisle with a woman and a young boy, perhaps 7 years old. Grace felt her heart rate spike not with longing or regret, but with the visceral memory of humiliation. The restaurant, the casual cruelty, the tears she had tried so hard to hide. Grace, on Kong. Lily tugged at her hand. I'm fine, sweetie. I just saw someone I used to know. At that moment, Marcus looked up. Their eyes met across the aisle, and Grace watched as recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that looked almost like panic. He turned away quickly, suddenly very interested in a display of kitchen towels. But the woman beside him, the woman Grace now recognized, must be Jessica, the girlfriend Marcus had mentioned on Christmas Eve, had noticed. Her eyes followed Marcus's gaze to Grace, then back to Marcus. Do you know her? Jessica asked loud enough for Grace to hear. No, I mean not really. We just... Miss Grace, Lily's voice carried across the store with its usual volume. Can I get the T-Rex stickers? They're the best ones. Jessica's expression sharpened. She walked toward Grace before Marcus could stop her. I'm sorry, but I saw Marcus looking at you. How do you two know each other? Grace hesitated. She had no desire to cause a scene, no need for revenge or vindication. But she also had no intention of lying. We had a blind date once, Christmas Eve. It didn't go well. Christmas Eve. Jessica's voice went cold. When he told me he had an emergency work meeting, Grace saw the pieces clicking together in Jessica's mind, the late-night texts, the hurried excuses, the way Marcus had been so busy during the holidays. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Marcus said, appearing beside Jessica with a forced smile. Grace and I barely spoke. It was nothing. You told me you had a work emergency. Jessica's voice was rising. You said you were at the office until midnight. Jessica, can we not do this here? He came to the restaurant, Grace said quietly. He told me he was only there because his mother pressured him into it, that he was already seeing someone. Then he left. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica turned to Marcus with an expression that promised a very long conversation in their future. The little boy tugged at her hand, confused by the tension among the adults. Grace took Lily's hand. We should go. As they walked toward the checkout, Lily looked up at her with thoughtful eyes. Grace chu dala I chu a trumso kolam? Grace smiled despite herself. He's someone who was very unkind to me once. But because he was unkind, I met you and your daddy, so maybe I should thank him. Lily considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. Chue van la jerkface. Bo nai kan kum duk nai jerkface, yung kong yi tut to trung do. Grace laughed a real laugh, free of the bitterness she might have expected to feel. Your dad is right about not saying it, but you're also right about thinking it. That evening she told Daniel about the encounter. Are you okay? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I'm better than okay. Grace realized it was true. I spent months wondering what was wrong with me, why he treated me that way. But seeing him today, seeing how scared he looked, I realized it was never about me. It was about him. He's a coward who didn't recognize what was right in front of him. Maybe, but if he hadn't been a coward, I wouldn't have been sitting alone at that restaurant, and Lily wouldn't have walked up to my table. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, everything that went wrong led to everything that's going right. Exactly. Grace leaned against his shoulder. So maybe I should be grateful to Marcus Webb. He was terrible enough to push me towards something wonderful. The letter came in April, delivered not by mail but by Margaret Hartley's own hands. Grace had been dating Daniel for 4 months by then. She'd become a regular presence at family dinners, had learned the specific way Lily liked her sandwiches, had developed her own relationship with Margaret that had evolved from cautious evaluation to genuine warmth. When Margaret called and asked Grace to come to her house alone, Grace felt a flutter of anxiety. But the older woman's voice had been calm, almost gentle, and Grace had agreed. Margaret's house was a small bungalow in a quiet neighborhood filled with photographs of Daniel at various ages, and Grace noticed several photos of Sarah that she recognized from Daniel's house. Margaret led her to the living room and gestured toward the couch. "Sit down, Grace. There's something I need to give you." On the coffee table sat a wooden box, old but well-maintained, with a simple brass clasp. Before Sarah died, Margaret began, her voice steady with practiced control. She spent her final weeks preparing, not just for death, but for what would come after. She made videos for Lily to watch at different ages. She wrote letters to Daniel, and she wrote one more letter, one that she asked me to keep until the right time. Grace felt her heart rate increase. The right time, the right person. Margaret opened the box and withdrew an envelope cream-colored and slightly yellowed with age. Written on the front in handwriting that trembled but remained legible were the words, "For the woman who comes next." Grace stared at the envelope, suddenly understanding. Sarah wrote this for me. She wrote it for whoever Danielle eventually fell in love with. She knew him well enough to know he would love again, and she wanted that woman to understand. Margaret held out the envelope. "You don't have to read it now. You don't have to read it at all. But I've watched you with my son. I've watched you with my granddaughter. And I believe you're the person Sarah was writing to." Grace took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was soft with age, the seal still intact. "I'll give you privacy," Margaret said, standing. "Like as long as you need." Alone in the quiet living room, Grace carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "If you're reading this, it means Daniel has found someone new. And if my mother-in-law has given you this letter, it means she believes you're worthy of him. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you look like or what you do or how you met. But I know some things about you already because I know my husband. You must be patient because Daniel gives his heart slowly. You must be strong because he will try to protect you from his pain instead of sharing it. You must be kind because he responds to kindness like a flower responds to sunlight, slowly, tentatively, but with eventual blooming that will take your breath away. And you must love Lily, not because I'm asking you to, but because it would be impossible not to. She came into the world with more personality than most adults, and I suspect by now she's only gotten more so. She will test you. She will exhaust you. She will make you laugh until you cry and cry until you laugh. She is the best thing I ever created, and I am trusting you with her. I want you to know something that took me too long to understand. You are not replacing me. Love isn't a finite resource that runs out when it's shared. Daniel's heart has room for me and for you. Lily's heart has room for me and for you. Don't ever feel that loving them means erasing what I was to them. I also want you to know that I don't resent you. I might have once, when I was first diagnosed, and angry at the unfairness of it all. But as the end grew closer, I found myself hoping for you, hoping that someone would come along who could make Daniel smile again, who could give Lily a mother's love when I no longer could. If you're reading this, you are that person, and I am grateful. Take care of them for me. Not because they can't take care of themselves, but because everyone deserves someone who chooses to show up day after day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Thank you for loving my family. Thank you for giving them a future I couldn't give them myself. With hope and gratitude, Sarah Grace read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. When Margaret returned, she found Grace clutching the pages like something precious. "She was remarkable," Grace whispered. "She was." Margaret sat beside her. "And so are you, Grace. Welcome to this family. You've earned your place in it." The community center funding came through in late April, a phone call from Catherine Wu at the Virginia Foundation for Inclusive Communities. $2.3 million, enough to complete Sarah's vision without any involvement from Morrison Development. Daniel rejected Morrison's offer the same day, composing an email that thanked him for his interest, while declining in terms that left no room for negotiation. Spring arrived in Richmond with cherry blossoms appearing overnight along the streets like pink promises of renewal. The community center was rising from its foundation at last, steel beams reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for something just beyond reach. Daniel visited the site every week, walking through the skeletal structure with a hard hat borrowed from the foreman, tracing the lines of Sarah's design as they materialized into physical reality. Grace often accompanied him, her hand warm in his, as they navigated the construction debris. "When it's done, can I come here?" Lily asked during one visit. "Even though I don't have a disability." Daniel knelt to her level. "This place is for everyone, Princess. Kids with disabilities and kids without. Your mommy designed it that way. She believed that belonging shouldn't have boundaries." Mommy was really smart. She was the smartest person I ever knew. "Miss Grace is smart too. She knows all the dinosaurs, and she can do fractions without a calculator." Lily's expression grew thoughtful. "Daddy, is it okay that I love Miss Grace? It doesn't mean I don't love Mommy, right?" Daniel pulled his daughter into a hug. "Loving Miss Grace doesn't take anything away from loving Mommy. Hearts don't work like that. They don't have a limit. They just keep growing to make room for everyone who matters. I think Mommy sent her to us." Lily's voice carried simple conviction. "Remember on Christmas Eve when I walked to her table, it felt like someone was pushing me. Like I had to go say hello, even though I didn't know why." Daniel thought about that night, the seemingly random sequence of events that had brought Grace into their lives. Perhaps it was coincidence, perhaps it was something else entirely. Maybe she did Princess. Maybe she did. The engagement happened in April on an evening when the air smelled like rain and possibility. Daniel had not planned the moment with any particular care. He simply knew with a certainty that required no deliberation that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Grace Sullivan. They were sitting on the porch swing, watching Lily chase fireflies across the backyard, when Daniel reached into his pocket and withdrew the ring he had been carrying for 3 weeks. It was a new ring chosen specifically for Grace, a simple diamond that caught the fading light like a captured star. "Grace," his voice came out steadier than he expected. "I've been thinking about something." She turned to look at him. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. At least, I hope it's not." He opened the box. "I spent 3 years believing that my story was over, that the best parts had already happened. And then you appeared at a restaurant table on Christmas Eve, and my daughter walked up to you like she'd known you her whole life, and suddenly the story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter." Grace's hand came up to cover her mouth, her eyes bright with tears. "I love you. I love how you listen to Lily's dinosaur lectures like they're the most important thing in the world. I love how you challenge me when I'm being stubborn and support me when I'm being brave. I love how you've made yourself part of our family without trying to change what we already were." He took her hand. "Will you be my wife?" "Yes." The word came out as a whisper, then stronger. "Yes, Daniel. Yes to everything." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and Lily came running across the yard, demanding to know what was happening. "It means Miss Grace is going to marry Daddy," Daniel explained. "It means she's going to be part of our family forever." Lily's reaction was immediate. "Finally, I've been waiting forever for this." She threw her arms around Grace's neck. "Can I call you something special? I thought maybe I could call you Mama Grace. That way it's special for you, but different from Mommy Sarah, because Mommy Sarah is still my mommy, even though she's in heaven." Grace looked at Daniel over Lily's shoulder, her eyes asking permission. "You can call me whatever feels right to you, sweetheart." "Mama Grace it is," Lily beamed. "And now can we get a puppy?" The wedding was scheduled for October, when the leaves would be turning and the air would carry that particular crispness that Sarah had always loved about fall. Daniel chose the venue carefully, a small chapel outside Richmond, where his parents had been married, where his grandmother had been married before them. Grace had no father to walk her down the aisle. Her mother had died when she was 12, and her father had remarried and drifted out of her life. She had considered walking alone when Walter made the suggestion that changed everything. Daniel had brought Grace to visit his grandfather on a rare lucid day, hoping to share the news of their engagement. "You need someone to walk you down the aisle," Walter said, his voice thin but certain. "Someone who can represent the family you're joining." "I was thinking about walking alone." "Nonsense." Walter's hand reached out to clasp hers. "Let me do it. Let an old man be useful one more time before the darkness takes everything." Grace looked at Daniel, uncertain, and he nodded with a tightness in his throat. "I would be honored, Walter. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have." The day of the wedding arrived wrapped in autumn sunlight, the trees surrounding the chapel ablaze with reds and golds. Daniel stood at the altar, his heart racing with anticipation. The music began, and the gathering turned toward the doors at the back. Walter appeared first, his wheelchair pushed by a nurse from Sunrise Memory Care, his blue eyes scanning the room with clarity that seemed impossible given his condition. Grace walked beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her white dress simple and elegant. They moved slowly down the aisle, Walter's wheelchair setting the pace, and Daniel watched them approach with a sense of fullness that threatened to overflow. This was his family, old and new, gathered to witness a beginning that had seemed impossible just 10 months ago. Walter stopped at the front of the chapel and looked up at Daniel. "I'm giving you this woman," Walter said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "because she's good enough for my grandson, and because she's brave enough to love him even knowing how much he carries. Take care of her, Daniel, and let her take care of you. That's how it works." Daniel reached down to embrace his grandfather. "Thank you, Grandpa, for everything. Make it count. Make all of it count." The ceremony was brief, the vows they had written carrying more weight than any traditional language could have achieved. Grace, Daniel began, "I came to you broken, not shattered, but cracked in places I didn't know how to fix. You didn't try to fix me. You just loved me, cracks and all. You taught me that I could honor Sarah's memory, not by living in her shadow, but by carrying her light forward." Grace wiped tears from her eyes. "Daniel, I spent years waiting for someone to choose me, to show up when they said they would. And then you appeared and your daughter walked up to my table like it was the most natural thing in the world. And suddenly I understood what I'd been waiting for. Not perfection, just someone real." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Daniel kissed Grace while the congregation erupted in applause. Lily's voice rose above the celebration. "Finally! Now can we get a puppy?" The reception was held in the completed community center, Sarah's final project now standing exactly as she had designed it. A plaque near the entrance read, "Sarah Hartley Community Center, where every dream has room to grow." The moment that stayed with Daniel came later when Lily appeared at his elbow with a serious expression. "Daddy, can I dance with Grandpa Walter? The nurses said it's okay if I'm careful." Daniel looked across the room to where Walter sat in his wheelchair watching the celebration. "Of course, Princess. I think he'd like that very much." He watched as Lily crossed the room and took Walter's hands, moving them gently in time with the music. The old man looked down at his great-granddaughter with a smile that transcended the fog in his mind. Grace appeared beside Daniel, her hand slipping into his. "She has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. She gets that from Sarah. The ability to see what people need before they know they need it." They danced until the music slowed and the guests began to leave, until Lily fell asleep on a pile of coats, and Walter was taken back to Sunrise Memory Care. They danced until the community center emptied and the only light came from the stars visible through the skylights Sarah had insisted upon. And then they went home to the house that was now truly theirs, to the future that stretched out before them. Christmas Eve arrived exactly 1 year after the night that had started everything. Daniel stood at the living room window, watching snow fall through the glow of the Christmas lights, listening to the sounds of his family, preparing for celebration behind him. Grace was in the kitchen with Lily engaged in what sounded like an intense negotiation about cookies. "More chocolate chips is always better, Mama Grace. That's just science. Science also says that too much sugar will keep you awake all night, and then Santa can't come. That's not real science, that's parent science, which is different and mostly fake." Daniel smiled at the familiar cadence of their bickering. Margaret appeared at his elbow. "You're being contemplative again. Just thinking about how different everything is from a year ago." "You're not different, you're just more yourself. This is who you always were underneath the grief." A crash from the kitchen interrupted, followed by Lily's immediate declaration that whatever had happened was definitely not her fault. They found Grace standing in a cloud of flour while Lily attempted to look innocent beside an overturned mixing bowl. "Let me guess," Daniel said. "The bowl attacked unprovoked." "It jumped Daddy, I barely touched it." "Bowls don't jump. This one did. Mama Grace saw it." The cleanup took longer than it should have, largely because Lily kept finding opportunities to flick flour at people. By the time order was restored and the cookies were in the oven, everyone was covered in white powder. After dinner and Lily's bedtime preparations, Daniel's phone buzzed with a message. "Mr. Hartley, your grandfather has been asking for you." He's having a lucid period and says there's something he needs to tell you. Daniel stared at the message. Walter's lucid moments had grown increasingly rare over the past year. What is it? Grace asked. Walter, he's asking for me. They say he's lucid. Go, I'll hold down the fort here. He drove through snow-covered streets to Sunrise Memory Care. Walter was in his room seated by the window, but something was different. There was a presence in his eyes, a sharpness Daniel had not seen in months. You came. Walter's voice was stronger than expected. I wasn't sure you would. Christmas Eve and all. I'll always come when you call Grandpa. Sit down. There are things I need to say, and I don't know how long I'll be able to say them. Daniel pulled a chair close. I'm proud of you, Walter began. I've been proud of you your whole life, but especially this year. The way you saved Sarah's building, the way you opened your heart to Grace. You became the man I always knew you could be. I had good teachers. You had people who loved you. That's different. Walter's hand found Daniel's. I'm going to forget again soon. Maybe for good this time. The doctors don't say it, but I can feel it. Grandpa, let me finish. I need you to know, for I can't know anymore, that meeting Grace was one of the best moments of my life. Walking her down that aisle, it was a gift I didn't deserve, but was grateful to receive. She's exactly what Sarah would have wanted for you. I don't doubt it, not anymore. And Lily, a smile crossed Walter's face. That child is going to change the world someday. She's got Sarah's heart and your stubbornness and something else that's all her own. Walter was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the window. Your grandmother is waiting for me, I think. I can feel her sometimes on the other side of the fog. I'm not afraid, Daniel. I've lived a good life. Daniel could not speak past the lump in his throat. Go home to your family. It's Christmas Eve. That's where you belong. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, boy. I always have. I always will, even when I can't remember why. Daniel drove home through streets transformed by snow. The house was dark except for the Christmas lights. Grace was still awake, sitting on the couch. He's okay, Daniel said, settling beside her, as okay as he can be. He wanted to tell me he's proud, that he's grateful, that he's ready. Ready. For whatever comes next. Daniel pulled Grace close. He said my grandmother is waiting for him. Maybe she is. They sat in darkness, the Christmas tree lights casting shadows across the walls. Somewhere upstairs, Lily was dreaming. He told me to come home to my family. That's where I belong. He's right. I know. Family isn't just the people you're born to. It's the people you choose, the people who show up when things are hard and stay when things get harder. Grace's hand found his. Is that what we are, people who showed up? That's exactly what we are. You showed up at a restaurant table on Christmas Eve, and I showed up to rescue you even though I didn't know that's what I was doing. We've been showing up ever since. Jim. Christmas morning arrived with the subtlety of a 7-year-old's enthusiasm, a flying leap onto Daniel's bed at approximately 5:47 a.m. Daddy, Mama Grace, wake up, Santa came. The present opening proceeded with ceremonial chaos. Lily attacked each package with focused intensity, her exclamations punctuating the sounds of tearing paper. The purple bike from last year had been upgraded to a bigger model. Art supplies were examined with professional interest. And then when most packages had been opened, Daniel exchanged a look with Grace and nodded toward the garage door. Lily, I think there's one more present, but you have to close your eyes. Why is it a surprise? I love surprises. Just close your eyes. Daniel opened the garage door and retrieved the large box he had hidden there 2 days ago. Inside, a small golden retriever puppy was just waking up, blinking sleepily at the sudden light. Okay, princess, open your eyes. Lily opened her eyes. For one long moment, she was completely silent, possibly the first time in her 7 years of life. Then she screamed, "A puppy, a real, actual puppy!" Santa listened. Santa finally listened. She launched herself at the box, and the puppy responded with excited yips and tail wags that threatened to destabilize his entire small body. Lily scooped him up, and he immediately began licking her face with enthusiasm. What should we name him? Grace asked. Lily considered, her face scrunched with concentration. Pancake. Pancake. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Because pancakes are the best thing in our family, and he's going to be the best puppy in our family. So he should be named after the best thing. Lily hugged the puppy closer. Plus, he's kind of flat and golden, like a pancake. Margaret shook her head. That child's logic is terrifying sometimes. Pancake it is, Daniel agreed. The rest of Christmas morning passed in happy chaos. Lily chasing Pancake around the living room, the puppy sliding on wrapping paper, Margaret complaining that someone was going to break something, and then sneaking the dog treats when she thought no one was looking. Later after breakfast, and after Lily had exhausted herself playing with Pancake, Daniel sat with Grace on the porch swing. The snow had stopped, and the world was blanketed in white. 1 year, Grace said softly. 1 year ago tonight, I was crying alone at a restaurant table thinking my life would never change. And I was wondering if I would ever feel anything again. And then Lily walked up to me and asked if I was okay. Daniel pulled her close. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually doorways. Doorways to something better. Something we never could have imagined. Inside, they could hear Lily's voice. Pancake, Pancake, come back. You can't eat Grandma's slippers. Grace laughed. Our life is never going to be quiet, is it? No, Daniel said, and he realized he was smiling. It's never going to be quiet. It's going to be loud and chaotic and full of a child who has no concept of boundaries and a dog named after breakfast food. And a grandmother who pretends to be stern but spoils everyone. And a grandfather who's fading but still sees everything that matters. And us. Grace looked at him. Two people who showed up for each other and kept showing up. The door burst open and Lily appeared with Pancake in her arms, both of them looking slightly disheveled. Mama Grace, Daddy Pancake learned how to sit, well, kind of. He sits and then falls over. But he's trying, and that's what matters. Daniel looked at his daughter, this fierce, loving, unstoppable force of nature, who had walked up to a stranger on Christmas Eve and changed everything. He looked at Grace, the woman who had been brave enough to say yes to a family that came with complications and grief and a child who talked too much and too loud. He looked at Pancake, who was now chewing on Lily's sleeve with great concentration. He looked at the life he had somehow impossibly managed to build from the wreckage of the life he had lost. Come inside, he said to his family. It's cold out here. Can Pancake sit on my lap while we watch Christmas movies? Can Pancake do anything else? No, but I can sit on your lap while Pancake sits on my lap. It'll be a lap tower. They went inside to the warmth and the lights and the chaos that constituted their life. The future stretched out before them, uncertain, yes, but no longer frightening. Daniel Hartley had spent 3 years believing his story was over. He had been wrong. It was just beginning.